Hey guys, SGT here, and I want to thank everybody for submitting a question for those who did. I posted a piece saying that I was going to talk with Andy Hoffman, and I'd love to have your questions. And 20 different people submitted great questions in a very short period of time, and for that, Andy and I are both gratified. Andy, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me. It looks like it's going to be a jam-packed show.
Yeah, it is, and let's hit the ground running. This first one comes from J.A. Brown and Troy. I'm kind of condensing these two together because they're both asking essentially about semi-numismatic bullion plays. And just to set the stage for you, Andy, I've talked about this quite a bit, and I'm passionate about coins like the Canadian Wildlife Series or some of the Perth Mint products, the koalas, the kookaburras, the Lunar Series, coins that are capped at a mintage of 300,000 or less. What I've found is those premiums really expand in later years when those coins are no longer available. What's your take on semi-numismatic bullion plays like that?
Well, I'm not going to purport to be an expert on numismatics. We certainly have experts within Miles Frankiln. My initial thought is when it comes to anything numismatic, if you're going to pay a premium, you better be knowledgeable about what you're buying, because obviously, I equate numismatic business to stamps or baseball cards or even art, because there are some non-qualitative aspects that you really just have to be comfortable with. There's parts of the numismatic business which are frauds. I think some of the things where they try to sell it to you with scarcity value, and then there are some things you're talking about which will have some scarcity value, although over time it's really difficult to tell what the premium will be. And I'm going to end that by saying we have experts at Miles Frankiln who could give better answers on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another numismatic coins question coming up, so we can revisit that. Just so folks understand my take, when a coin only has a run of 300,000, it's going to be much harder to come by in future years. So, for instance, if you're going to pay $5 over spot for a Perth Mint product, I think that's worth it all day long versus paying $3.50 for a Silver Eagle. And the reason that's worked out for me is because, Andy, as you know, they'll make tens of millions of Eagles to meet demand, whereas the Perth Mint products are capped around 300,000, 500,000. So when those runs are over, they're over. And so I've just found on eBay and other places, those types of coins with limited mintage runs really command a premium in the future. So that's my take, guys. We'll move on here. This one is from Bob. Andy, Bob is asking, regarding the little guy or average family that maybe only has $10,000 or $20,000 in the bank, and it's their only savings. He's spoken with people who already have a little silver purchased, but they're worried about access to their money. They're worried about having liquid cash in a bank for a worst-case scenario. He's wondering, is the bank the safest place, or is there a better place to park that cash?
The answer is the bank is the worst place, and I'd rather have my cash under my mattress than in a bank. I've taken everything personally out of the banking system except for the tiny bit my wife won't let me take out. And I believe firmly that people need to realize when you're thinking about your savings that you need to think outside of what you've been taught for all your life, which is that dollars are savings and banks are the safest place to put them. I think over 100 years it's pretty clear that dollars are not the safest place to hold your money. And I think what we've seen in the past 5 years shows you that banks are not the safest place. If it weren't for all the bailouts, we'd have lost many more banks, and we're going to lose many more banks as we go forward. I think if people just realize that banks are dangerous and they think in terms of safety, they'll realize that there are other places to put your money, whether it's in cash or whether it's in coins or anything else that you hold of value.
Sure. And I have a follow-up question for you, Andy, regarding credit unions. I had a few drinks with friends the other night on Saturday night. One of our friends runs a credit union, is a senior manager there, and he explained to me that they actually aren't able to lend out more money than they have on deposit. So it isn't a fractional reserve type of system. Do you feel any better about credit unions?
Well, I'm no expert on credit unions. If it is true that they don't lend out more than they have, well, then I feel better about those systems. I mean, look, everyone has their own level of safety. I can't say that what's right for me is what's right for everyone else. I call it the protection continuum. You have to decide how far out, on the continuum of mainstream you want to be. I don't trust anything with a bank. If they say they're doing that, well, then it's up to you to trust them. But, especially a lot of credit unions are very small institutions compared to some of these giant ones. So it can be risky there too. But again, I don't know much about credit unions. I just don't like banks in general.
Sure. This one comes from Dwayne, and Dwayne says that he recently read that the sale of government coins does not have to be reported, but the sale of privately minted bars does. I think he's talking about tax ramifications of sales on precious metals. Do you know anything about that, Andy?
I know some, but again, in my role, I'm very careful about what to say, and certainly you should speak to an accountant for any of these things. But I do believe that for certain coins, I believe Eagles and several others, that you can sell up to 25 or 24 where the dealer doesn't have to report it. But I believe that you have to report it. It's just up to you to speak with your accountant about how to do it. I can't give tax advice, but there are definitely thresholds if you sell above a certain amount of certain coins that you do have to report.
Now, this one, we're getting in the weeds here again with numismatic questions and tax questions, and we're going to move on here, but let me hit you with this one, too. I'm a fan of St. Gaudens common date coins. I don't think there's anything wrong with a gold St. Gaudens coin that you're not paying that huge of a premium on. They're beautiful coins. So this reader, Brad, is asking, would you recommend buying gold and silver coins that carry more numismatic value since they tend to hold their value better in a deflationary collapse? Now, I'm not sure if that's true. That's what he's asking, though.
Well, the first answer is they do not hold their value better. They're coins. Now, there are aspects of certain numismatic coins which are more beneficial. Now, you go back to the Roosevelt confiscation of the 30s without knowing the exact wording. It was something like, well, certain numismatic coins are not subject to the confiscation, not that anything was really confiscated. So some people believe that they're more valuable than regular bullion coins. Now, my first thought is, well, they can just as easily make a decree that they can take anything they want. So I really don't care. That said, the premiums, unless it's changed in the last few weeks, the premiums on some of those pre-1933 coins, I believe, have come down to the level where they're almost the same price as the regular bullion coins, and that's the first time that we've seen that in 20 years of business here. So we've been recommending people, look, if you're going to buy the bullion coins, you might as well buy these because they're basically the same price. But that said, if the the premiums went back to where they have been in recent years, I mean, I've heard they were 50%, 30%, then we'd say, look, you need to be a numismatic collector because you're taking a big risk in paying far more than the value of the melt value. So, and again, when we come to numismatics, I can't emphasize enough, this is not my area of expertise. If you call Miles Frankiln, 800-822-8080, all of our brokers can give you detailed answers on these questions.
Right. And I've done business with you guys for years, Andy, long before I ever started interviewing you or David or Andy Scheckman, and no one ever pushed a numismatic coin on me ever at Miles Frankiln. I don't think that's really what you guys are all about in any way. Which leads me back to a question from J.A. Brown, who asks, do you think working for Miles Frankiln, which sells precious metals, has skewed your objectiveness at all?
No. The reason that I'm working for Miles Frankiln is because of my views. They didn't hire me and then have me change. David, found me because we think alike, not just about coins in general, but I think about life in general. And I found a kinship with him and Andy in our quest to help people. We're all fully invested in the business, and we're fully invested in our customers and helping people. And if you've read my rants, I've been writing now I've been fully invested in the sector. It's 10 years this month, and I've been writing publicly back since, 2005, and there's not a word different that I wrote then than I wrote now, other than the fact that now I'm very, very skeptical on mining shares and, frankly, any paper investments of any kind.
That couldn't have been a better segue. You didn't know this question was coming unless you're looking at my website right now with the comments there. But this one's from Mark D., and Mark asks, how come you don't like mining shares? In the last depression, shares like Homestake did very, very well. Okay, well, the last depression was a long, long time ago, and we had free markets back then. And frankly, we didn't have a free gold market. We had $35 an ounce the whole time. The fact was there were a couple of mining shares around, and they went up because people believed that ultimately the price of gold would have to, be unbound. But it wasn't unbound for another 30 or 40 years. It wasn't until 1973 until people were actually allowed to own gold, and it wasn't until 71 when we went off of the standard where gold was fixed. So, but as far as comparing then to now, it's apples and oranges.
my problem with mining shares, and again, you have to know my background. I was a Wall Street sell-side and buy-side analyst for 15 to 20 years. I also have owned, until last year when I sold my mining shares, I owned 100% of my net worth was mining shares. I also spent 5 years either as an IR officer or IR consultant to dozens of mining companies, most of them junior. I know this sector down cold. I know everything about junior mining stocks anyone can know. So I'm not saying this just out of some blind, I don't like them for whatever reason. I've been watching these valuations plummet for years. They peaked 5 years ago, almost to the month when the venture exchange peaked. I believe that I've talked about D-Day, which is about 18 months ago when silver almost went over 30 for the first time. That's when I saw the algorithms take over the senior mining shares. And anyone watching the Huey knows very well there's something very, very wrong with it. As for the juniors, they are now trading literally at all-time lows. We're talking about the levels that we saw after the BRIEX. That's how bad it is. And I think that the banks are part of it too, naked shorting these companies so they can force them into these horrible financings with warrants. And I've seen nothing but misery. And again, it comes down to, it used to be years ago, I was in this too, offensively. I was like, they're going to be internet stocks, I'm going to get rich. Now I realize this is about protecting myself from an ultimate collapse of the dollar and collapse of the whole financial system. I don't even want to make money in shares knowing that they're sitting in banks and brokerages that I may not be able to get my money out, like MF Global. You got to protect yourself. And the results are there. Again, here's my final word on the mining shares. I do believe at some point the cartel will break and the shares will go up. But my ultimate worry is that there's going to be nationalization rumors like YPF just happened in Argentina last week and windfall taxes, and it's going to suck away any of the profits. That's what I believe will happen.
Well, I think this is serendipity. I'm reading these in the order they came in. This one's from Daniel. I think I already know your answer, but he says for people who are older than 60 and above, and are looking for income from their wealth, do you recommend dividend-paying gold stocks?
No, I don't. I mean, look, when we went back to 2005 and 2006, when every one of my friends and relatives is telling me I need to buy a house, and that's when I lived in New York, you have to buy a house, it only goes up. One of the biggest reasons they tell me to buy a house was that it was a deduction on your interest, your mortgage interest. That's why I should buy it. And I'm going, well, what about if the house falls in price? Isn't that more important than a mortgage interest deduction? That's how I view dividends, and that's where I disagree with even Richard Russell talking about compounding and interest. First of all, interest rates are so low, and I'm sure he'd agree even, that what's the point? You're not making any money. And second of all, how could anyone say I'm going to buy Newmont Mining for a dividend when the stock just plummets and plummets? Who cares? Plus, they're talking about now raising the dividend tax rate from 15% to 40%. So my point is, these are just pittances. We're talking about protecting your assets. And of course, we're talking about growing them over time. I think dividends are a distraction in this world, not in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They were the real thing. Today, they're a distraction. Very
good. This one comes from Bix Weir, and I'm going to try to bring this down to a bullet point here, but he's basically saying that physical bullion as a trade, I think in terms of the central banks between themselves, is really a faith-based trade because there's been reports of counterfeiting, tungsten-tainted bars, and this sort of thing, and there's really no adequate testing going on. So he's asking, once faith is lost due to a large enough revelation of tainted bars, what do you think will happen to gold and silver on a retail basis? Will it adversely affect the market?
Well, the stories about the tungsten bars, I think I'm not going to give a overarching opinion, but I think they may be overblown. I don't think there's quite as many of those instances out there. And from what I've read, from what the refiners have written, these things barely ever happen. That said, also, when they do happen, they happen with the bars. I mean, a bar is big enough that you can economically drill into it if you have the right materials and put tungsten in and somehow try to get away with it if you can get the exact right weight replaced. But it rarely ever happens. And talking to our distributors in the coin business, it never happens. I mean, how are you going to drill a little hole into a tiny little coin and try to pull some out and put tungsten in? It wouldn't even be economic to do. Frankly, the only counterfeits that our distributors say they've ever really even seen of any material kind are taking bullion coins and trying to make them look like numismatics. So it's very rare that you're going to see that. I'm not worried at all about I worry about everything, and I'm not worried about the coin business being tainted by counterfeiting. That said, you be careful who you buy from. If you just buy from strangers on eBay with no ratings, sometimes you get what you pay for. But if you buy from a real dealer or a real distributor, you're probably going to get the real deal.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there and say that I have had experience with Chinese fakes. Andy, I'm sure you're aware of those fake pandas. They're always underweight. So for those who, to Andy's point, buy from people you trust, buy from folks that are in the business of having a business of selling precious metals, because they can't get away with selling fakes. But buyer beware, because there are fake silver coins and gold coins coming out of China. Again, serendipity here. The question asked after Bix's question is from David Morgan, and David jokes, once the reptilians invade, will they prefer gold or silver as a bribe to spare your life? Now, I know that's satire, Andy, but there were folks that escaped Nazi Germany by being able to buy their freedom with precious metals. What's your take on using precious metals as barter in the future in a worst-case scenario?
Well, he uses the word reptilian, but reptilian could mean anything. It really depends on any person's personal goals. If your goal is simply to preserve wealth, you probably would want to hold gold. But if you think you're going to actually need to use it to buy something, you're probably going to prefer smaller denomination coins or silver. And again, it comes down to your personal circumstances as well. Where are you going to store it? Who do you plan to leave it to? Do you plan to transport it? All kinds of things that come down to your personal decision as to the right mix of gold versus silver.
I see. Well, and I responded back to him by saying the reptilians have already invaded, and they run companies like Monsanto, Goldman, J.P. Morgan, and Rothschild & Sons.
And the government, of course.